Welcome to this explainer on the science of human sexuality. You know, when most people hear sex ed, they immediately picture some awkward, cringeworthy high school biology class. But the actual study of human sexuality is a vast, complex, and absolutely fascinating field. It goes way beyond basic anatomy. We're talking about peeling back layers of cultural myths, looking at hard scientific data, and ultimately understanding ourselves a whole lot better.
So what exactly makes someone sexually normal? It's the million-dollar question, right? It's something almost everyone wonders about at some point. We are constantly comparing ourselves to what we hear from friends or whatever we're scrolling past on social media. But normal is an incredibly slippery concept. In the realm of human sexuality, the range of what is typical, healthy, and consensual is remarkably wide. The truth is, nearly everyone who worries they might be abnormal eventually discovers that is simply not the case.
But studying sex isn't just about memorizing facts and anatomy. It's really about developing what we call a personal sexual philosophy. Think of it as your own unique foundation of knowledge, your attitudes, and your actions relating to what you want and who you are as a sexual being. It's about taking charge. It's about building an informed, empowering framework based entirely on what is right for you, as long as it involves consensual and responsible behavior, of course.
To help you build that philosophy, here is our roadmap for today. We'll look at the complexity of sexuality, overcoming sexual misinformation, the actual science of sex, and finally, ensuring ethical sex research. Let's dive in. Starting off with Section 1, the complexity of sexuality. Being a sexual human is about so much more than just basic physical acts. Get a load of this statistic. When researchers surveyed a group of college students, they found that only 20% of them, literally just 1 in 5, believed that oral sex constituted having sex. Think about that for a second. The very definition of what counts as sex varies wildly from person to person. Equating sex only with intercourse neglects a massive range of diverse experiences and pleasures. It really illustrates just how complex human behavior is and why clear communication with your partners is absolutely vital. Moving right along to Section 2, overcoming sexual misinformation. So, if this is all so incredibly complex, where are we actually getting our rule books? Well, usually from family, friends, TV, the internet, social media, or just our own trial and error. But here is the massive catch. Every single one of these sources is highly subjective. They are totally riddled with errors, myths, and outright falsehoods. If you're basing your personal sexual philosophy entirely on a viral social media post or a Hollywood movie, you are definitely working with a lot of faulty data. Now, looking at formal education in public schools, we generally see two main approaches. First is the abstinence-only approach. This method teaches that abstaining from sexual activity outside of marriage is the expected standard, and it often leaves out the nitty-gritty details on contraception. Then there's comprehensive sex education. This approach also stresses the value of abstinence, but it pairs that with medically accurate information on contraceptives, barrier methods, and navigating healthy relationships. And the research documented in our sources is pretty clear here. Abstinence-only programs have largely been seen to fail. The outcome of these programs was often just the spread of inaccurate information, which researchers found actually correlated with increased rates of unwanted pregnancies and sexually transmitted infections. It really just underscores why scientific literacy and access to medically accurate info are absolutely critical to public health. Which brings us to Section 3, the science of sex. Since we obviously can't rely on flawed educational programs or random viral posts, we have to turn to actual science. Researchers basically use 4 main methods here, completely mirroring the tools used in psychology and medicine. You've got surveys, which pioneer Dr. Alfred Kinsey famously used back in the 1940s to ask thousands of people about their private lives. Then there are observational studies, famously championed by Masters and Johnson, who directly observed physiological responses. And finally, correlational and experimental research.
Let's unpack correlational research real quick. Say you map heavy crack cocaine use against the chances of contracting an STI. You will see a positive correlation, meaning as one spikes, so does the other. But say it with me, correlation does not equal causation. The drug itself isn't biologically creating the STI. It's just that researchers can predict that behaviors associated with heavy drug use might increase exposure to STIs. It shows a relationship, not a direct cause. Now, if scientists actually want to prove a direct cause and effect, they have to use experimental research. They take a random group and split them right down the middle. One half is the experimental group. They get a specific treatment, which is your independent variable. The control group gets a different treatment, or no treatment at all. Then you measure the results, the dependent variable, for both groups and compare.
It's highly controlled, which is awesome for accurate data, even if it sometimes sacrifices a bit of that messy real-world feel. So, how in the world do researchers actually measure arousal objectively in these clinical settings? Well, they use some highly specialized, very sensitive tools. You've got devices like penile strain gauges and vaginal photoplethysmographs. These physical tools measure physiological changes, like blood flow, during sexual stimulation. It's a pretty stark reminder that human sexuality research isn't just theory, it's a hard, physical, and highly objective clinical science. But listen, all the fancy tools in the world are completely useless if your study doesn't have reliability and validity. Picture a dartboard. If all your darts are clustered tightly together but they're way off in the corner, your throw is reliable, it's consistent over time, but it's not valid because you totally miss the bullseye of what you're trying to hit. A study is only the gold standard when it hits that bullseye perfectly, meaning it's both reliable over time and valid in what it claims to measure. Hitting that scientific bullseye is incredibly tough, though, mostly because of something called self-selection bias. Think about it. The kind of person who cheerfully volunteers to participate in a clinical sex study is often very different from a truly random person off the street. They tend to be younger, maybe more sexually experienced, and usually have way more positive attitudes towards sex than the general public. Researchers have to constantly adjust for this bias so they don't accidentally skew their understanding of what is typical. All right, final stop, Section 4, ensuring ethical sex research. Because human sexuality is so deeply personal and private, every legitimate researcher absolutely has to follow 5 non-negotiable ethical safeguards. First, protection from harm, both physical and psychological. Second, informed consent. Participants need to know exactly what they are signing up for. Third, freedom to withdraw. You can walk out the door at any second without penalty. Fourth, debriefing, getting the full scoop on the study's true goals once it's over. And finally, strict confidentiality. These rules guarantee total respect for the human beings behind the data. And that actually brings us right back to where we started. We kicked things off talking about building your own personal sexual philosophy. So now that you know how complex the definitions really are, just how wild the misinformation out there is, and how rigorous the actual science has to be, I want to leave you with this question. How will understanding the true hard science of sex change your own philosophy? When we strip away all those cultural myths and just look at the facts, we empower ourselves to make healthier, smarter, and ultimately way more satisfying choices. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and always keep questioning what you know.